So our final product update in this lineup is Android APS, and we're happy to welcome developer David Byrne live from Australia for this talk. Hello, sir.
Hi, Amy.
How are you? Okay, I'm going to get your, good to see you. I'm going to get your slides going. There we go.
Right. Okay, next slide. So unlike the previous presentations, I can't represent the core Android APS stuff. As far as the official stuff over there goes, I'm just a user like everyone else, but I'm here to talk about some of the things that are in there and also some of the context for how we can do some further development. There are a whole bunch of people interested in what it can do and how they can contribute to it. I'm going to talk about some of those things. So next slide. Current version, we're on 3.3.2.1. Everyone who's not on that should probably update. I've had all sorts of, I deal with a whole bunch of people using Android APS, and the common thing is, oh, things just suddenly stopped working. It's, oh, have you updated to the last one? The browser build is fairly new with version 3.3. A lot of people are liking that you no longer need to set up the computer stuff. This is something that's been used on the other platforms for a while. And Android APS probably has the support for the most different devices, CGMs, pumps, of all of the systems out there. Although a lot of that code, as we're seeing, gets transported between systems. I'm not going to try and list everything. All the documentation is online. We go to the next. The authors of some of these are here. There's other variants of this where the repositories have been forked and changes have been put in. And some of that work then gets taken back from there into the main Android APS. So dynamic ISF was one of the examples of things that got developed outside and then transported in. With the latest AAPS update, some of the code infrastructure architecture has changed. So not everyone's tracking the latest version at the moment, but I'm sure that will come. There's continual process of things having to keep getting updated, partly because the Google developer interface keeps changing, which libraries are supported, things go out of date. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to continue to evolve. But most of the apps look somewhat similar to this. It is configurable as to which things you have on the screen, but if you look at that, it's a fairly obvious thing that that's an Android APS of some sort. The next slide. So the unannounced meals is something that other people have talked about with everything that's using OREF. So there are quite a few people who are now using this in a fully closed operation so that it's not just the unannounced meal coping with the things that I forget to announce. It's forgetting to announce everything and see where everything goes. This does, I think, really benefit from the variable ISF. There are several implementations being experimented with, although most of the time in main Android APS, it's just called dynamic ISF. There are automations that we can put in, basically a scripting language on top of it so that when this happens, don't know where we're going. There's scripting changes that happen so that when a certain circumstance comes up, we can change the status, such as when we go high, we can make things more aggressive, for example. And that was something we used to do a lot before the variable ISF came along. One of the risks with this is that sometimes people end up coding all sorts of logic on top into the automations and end up with something where they're actually fighting against OREF. So one of the advantages of the evolving systems is that we need fewer and fewer automations. But there are things at the moment, such as automations to say, oh, my step count has increased, so maybe I need to make it more aggressive. Some of these things we're starting to see some of the reactions to unannounced exercise coming in. Hopefully they will evolve later on into actual code inside the system. Next. We still have things called the master branch in Android APS. A bunch of systems have moved to master, moved to main, but doesn't really matter in terms of where the data is. With all of these systems, there is an assumption made everywhere that Git is important, but I'm not sure. There may be people in this meeting who are trying to find their way around this stuff. It is important to try and work out how to use some of this stuff. You can do a lot of, you don't need to become an expert in everything to get started. You will see on that web page there where it's looking at the Android APS repository in GitHub, there's code, there's issues, there's pull requests. Pull requests are where people are pulling new things into the system, but the issues I'm going to talk about in a minute. In fact, I'm going to go to the next slide and talk about the issues. So there are lots of issues being written up in there, and this is true of all of the systems. You can go and look at the other issues and see what other people are reporting on. Sometimes those are ideas people have had. Sometimes those are bug reports. Sometimes you might look at those and that might give you an idea for some problem that you're trying to resolve. And sometimes it's just a contact for other people who are working on the systems. Don't assume that, for example, a Facebook group where there's a whole bunch of people talking about the system is the place to find everyone, because not everyone's going to be participating in those. So reading through the issues, becoming aware of what people are looking at is very useful, and it's a place for you to put up other ideas and then have them go somewhere, have them shot down, get some feedback on them. Next. Yep, thank you. One of the problems a lot of people have run into, I think, newcomers to the system, they end up with their own little fork. They'll be on a master branch, they'll be doing a whole bunch of changes and experiments, and then get stuck trying to work out how to blend this back to everything else. It is worth playing with some of the stuff in your own little repository, because this comes into play when we're doing the pull requests. I'm talking about stuff that really applies to all of these systems. This is basic infrastructure stuff, but if you're going to experiment with this stuff, make your own mistakes in your own little repo, and it's much easier to throw it away and pretend the mistake didn't actually happen and get it right the next time. It's a bit less public that way. Now, the next slide I wanted to talk about, which is really what are we going to work on? And there's a bunch of people going to be working in Vancouver. There's going to be work continuing on everywhere else. When that's finished, people are going to be not in Vancouver working on things. It's not as though when Vancouver finishes, the work's going to stop. So it's worth thinking about what are all the ideas that people want to be working on. It's interesting, some of the variable ISF stuff. There's a couple of different implementations of those, and they've been structured into several different systems. This is part of the issue of systems doing different things. I've actually been finding something interesting using some of those and integrating them back into a copy of the auto-tune code and finding that it's actually it's becoming more relevant again. So some of these things cross over all over the place. There are pump drivers people are working on. We already know people are looking at the Tandem Mobi. I know from personal experience that some pump drivers don't actually go anywhere because the manufacturer shuts things down. I have a perfectly functional Ipso pump driver, but the public pumps, they keep changing the encryption keys on, so it doesn't actually go anywhere. We're only able to use that in research. We've been doing some work on the sensor data management. There's a whole bunch of ideas that are going to come up for discussion as we go along. Some of the UI and UX, it's fairly busy in Android APS. There's a bunch of people looking at how can we make things simple, because most of the time, I must admit, with my use of Android APS, it started out that there were numbers everywhere. I liked all of these because I could interact with it all the time, but it's now got to the stage that I don't interact with it much, and I just want it to tell me the things that are important. So these may affect some of the UI, UX ideas. So part of the question is to get you thinking about, if you've been using Android APS, is there something that's in your head of things that you might want to behave differently, or maybe you've got a little idea, mention it to someone. It's not as though you're giving away the keys to the kingdom and your secret idea. The whole thing is about sharing with everyone else, and hopefully someone can help you make it happen. And next slide. Fairly straightforward. We're all here. There's nothing special about any of us saying that we are the core. Well, there are people who have to be the core developers to coordinate a project, but everyone has ideas and everyone can contribute. And last one, this is a short and sweet presentation. Jumping backwards and forwards. You can get hold of me if you want to talk about anything. I will be around here for a while. I will also be in Vancouver, and I'm online all over the place. Thank you very much. Just looking through the Q&A, and there is tracking done. James' question about tracking the exact ranges of Android versions and phone versions. The software does report back through the Android Firebase infrastructure about what's being used. And there is tracking of what version's being done. I don't have access to that data myself, but people like Milosh and other core developers do. So there is some visibility of that. There's a question there about the perpetual push towards enshittification. So there's some noise being made about Google changing the way we load up some of the APKs. Now, exactly how that's going to play out is a little bit unclear. We had things that came up a while back in terms of installing APKs onto watches. And it used to be that you could just use the Play Store to load up the APK from an app that was on the phone. That got changed, so it had to be only an app that was an official app in the Play Store. But we still have ways of loading those APKs onto watches. And essentially in all of this, we have to be the developer who is compiling and loading the app. That's part of our things of not supplying medical devices to other people. So Google has to provide us a way to load up the app that we've compiled. I'm not sure. I'm not really across the advocacy and the worrying about what might be going on there. There was a question about Android version issues with Omnipod. I'm not aware of any remaining issues beyond the AAPS 3321. That last .1 fixed the last Android version issues with 15 and 16. I'm aware of lots of people using dashpods with both of those versions of Android. There you go.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Great job. And as mentioned, you'll be able to talk with David more about these topics shortly in our discussions.